In this presentation, we're going to be discussing the meal pattern requirements for both lunch and breakfast under the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program. So during this presentation, we're going to talk about the different meal pattern requirements or component requirements, as well as the dietary specifications that go along with the meal pattern as well. So first, we're going to start with the very basics, discussing the component requirements for both lunch and breakfast. So the component requirements for lunch are the fruit, vegetable, meat alternate, grain, and milk component. All 5 of these components need to be offered daily in order to meet the meal pattern requirements. And there are specified component requirements or amounts that need to be offered daily and over the course of the week. There are 3 different grade groups under the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program as far as meal patterns, with an overlap between the K through 5 and the 6 through 8 meal patterns. Starting with the K through 5 grade group, we have 1 ounce equivalent of grain and meat alternate that need to be offered each daily, and 8 ounce equivalents that must be offered over the course of the week of both the meat and the grain component. For fruit, you need to offer at least a half a cup, 2.5 cups over the course of the week. Vegetables need to be 3/4 cup daily, 3 3/4 cups over the course of the week. Milk needs to be 1 cup daily and 5 cups over the course of the week. Okay, so you may notice that if you were to offer the daily requirement each day over the course of the week, you would not meet the weekly requirement for all of these component requirements. So if you're serving the fruit, vegetable, and milk component in the required daily amounts, you will meet that weekly requirement. However, when it comes to the meat alternate and the grain component, if you were to serve 1 ounce equivalent daily and that was it, you would only be serving 5 ounces over the course of the week. So you do need to exceed that minimum daily requirement at least a couple times over the course of the week to make sure you're meeting that weekly requirement as well. So in addition to the 5 different component requirements, we also have a vegetable subgroup requirement. There are 5 different vegetable subgroups that need to be served over the course of the week, and there is a specified minimum for each of those different subgroups that must be met over the course of the week. So for a 5-day school week, you need to serve at least a half a cup of dark green vegetable, 3/4 cup of red orange, half a cup of beans, peas, legumes, half a cup of starchy, and half a cup of the other subgroup. If you are serving less than 5 days over the course of the week, there are lesser weekly required minimums that must be met, so make sure to check out our website to see what those requirements would be. Because if you have a holiday in there, so you're only serving meals 4 days over the course of the week, there are adjusted weekly minimums for these subgroups that must be met. So dark green vegetables is going to be like your broccoli, spinach, romaine vegetables, things like that. Red orange is going to be things like sweet potatoes, carrots, tomatoes. Beans, peas, legumes, you want to think of your typical beans, so like pinto beans, black beans, refried beans, kidney beans, things like that. Keep in mind that green peas are not a pea and green beans are not a bean. Green peas fall under the starchy subgroup. So that's the same as like your potatoes and corn, and then your green beans are going to fall in the other subgroups. So things like your green beans, iceberg lettuce, cucumbers, things like that. Okay. Also keep in mind that if you were to offer just this weekly requirement, you would only be serving 2 3/4 cup requirement over the course of the week, which is less than the vegetable component requirement for the week. So you will need to serve above and beyond these weekly subgroup requirements in order to meet the vegetable component requirement. But these are just the weekly minimums, so make sure you're meeting at least that requirement. For grades 6 through 8, You need to offer at least 1 ounce equivalent of both grain and meat alternate daily, and serve at least 8 ounce equivalent of grain over the course of the week, 9 ounce equivalent of meat alternate over the course of the week, half a cup of fruit daily, 2.5 cups for the week, 3/4 cup of vegetable daily, 3 3/4 cups for the week, and 1 cup of milk daily, and then 5 cups for the week. The 6 through 8 vegetable subgroup requirements are exactly the same as grades K through 5, so half a cup of dark green, 3/4 cup of red orange, half a cup of beans, peas, legumes, half cup starchy, and half cup of other. For the K through 8 overlap, we're essentially just going to follow the 6 through 8 meal pattern requirement since they have a higher minimum component requirement for the meat alternate. So if you're serving a K through 8 component requirement meal pattern, you need to serve 1 ounce equivalent of both the meat alternate and the grain component, giving them 8 ounce equivalent of grain, 9 ounce equivalent of meat alternate over the course of the week, half a cup of fruit, 2.5 cups over the course of the week, 3/4 cup of vegetable daily, 3 3/4 cup over the course of the week, 1 cup of milk daily, and 5 cups over the course of the week. The vegetable subgroups for K through 8 are going to be exactly the same. Half a cup of dark green, 3/4 cup of red orange, half a cup of beans, peas, legumes, half cup starchy, and half cup other. So the component requirements for grades 9 through 12 are just a little bit higher. We need to serve 2 ounce equivalents of grain and meat alternate each for each day, making sure that they have 10 ounce equivalents over the course of the week. 1 cup of fruit daily, 5 cups for the week. 1 cup of vegetable daily, 5 cups for the week. And 1 cup of milk daily, 5 cups for the week. The vegetable subgroups for grades 9 through 12 are just a little bit higher for the red, orange, and the other subgroup. All the other subgroup requirements are going to be the same. So for grades 9 through 12, you need to serve at least a half cup of dark green, 1 1/4 cup of red orange, half a cup of beans, peas, legumes, half cup starchy, and 3/4 cup of the other subgroup. Some additional things to keep in mind when it comes to the National School Lunch and School Breakfast program: you need to serve at least an 1/8 cup of any of your fruit or vegetable requirement in order for it to be credited towards that component requirement. When you're serving dried fruit, it is going to credit for double the amount served. So if you're serving a 1/4 cup of raisins, it's going to credit a half a cup of fruit towards your meal pattern requirement. For leafy greens, it's going to be just the opposite. If you have a 1 cup serving, it's going to credit as a half a cup of your leafy green vegetable. No more than half of your fruit component can be in the form of juice over the course of the week. So if you're serving 5 cups of fruit and juice over the course of the week, no more than 2.5 cups of that could have been in the form of juice. And anytime you're serving juice, it needs to be 100% full strength juice. Some updates that are going into effect for the 1920 school year. You will be able to offer low-fat flavored milk. In the past, you were only allowed to offer fat-free or skim flavored milk. So in the past, we've had a waiver to offer the 1% low-fat flavored milk. That waiver will be done away with, and this will just simply be the rule going forward. You can just offer 1% or low-fat flavored milk going forward. There's also flexibility implemented for the whole grain requirement. Going forward, you will only be required to offer 50% of your weekly grains in the form of whole grain products. So if you serve 10 ounce equivalents of grains over the course of the week, only 5 ounce equivalents of those would have need to have been in the form of a whole grain product. So in the past, we also had a waiver for this. You could request the waiver for specific grain items. That waiver has been done away with, and you simply have to serve at least half of your grains in the form of whole grains going forward. So in addition to the component requirements, we also have dietary specifications that we have to follow as well. For grades K through 5, your dietary specifications need to be as follows. You need to have your weekly average meal pattern. Calories fall between 550 to 650 calories. Sodium needs to stay below 1,230 milligrams. Saturated fat needs to be less than 10% of total calories, and trans fat is 0. For all of our dietary specifications for both lunch and breakfast, you need to meet the same saturated fat and trans fat limitations. Calories and sodium are going to fluctuate a little bit between the different meal patterns. Keep in mind that for all of your dietary specifications, these are going to be weekly averages. So if you serve a little bit more than 650 calories one day, or maybe a little bit less than 550 calories on another day, as long as your weekly average is falling within that range for your calories and below that limitation for your sodium and saturated fat and trans fat, then your meal pattern would be compliant. So you can kind of go outside these limitations a little bit, just as long as you have days that bring you back into balance. For grades 6 through 8, the limitations are 600 to 700 calories and less than 1,360 milligrams of sodium. Then for our K through 8 overlap, we're just going to look at where those calorie ranges overlap, so between 600 to 650 calories. And staying with that lower sodium requirement of 1,230 milligrams. For grades 9 through 12, we need to serve between 750 to 850 calories and less than 1,420 milligrams of sodium. You'll notice that there's no overlap for grades K through 8 and 9 through 12, and that is because there is no overlap between the calorie limitations. The lowest amount of calories you could serve to 9 through 12 is still higher than the highest amount of calories you could serve to a 6 through 8 student. So that is the reason that those meal patterns need to be completely separate. Some updates that we have for the dietary specifications going into effect in 1920 school year. The sodium target 1 is going to be retained through school year 23-24, and then in school year 24-25 we'll go into the sodium target 2. And then the change has removed sodium target 3, so we'll no longer be going towards that as our end goal. So the sodium target limitations are 1,230 milligrams for target 1, grades K through 5. 6 through 8 is 1,360, and grades 9 through 12 is 1,420. For target 2, which will be taking effect in school year 24-25, our limit's going to be 935 milligrams for grades K through 5. 1,035 for grades 6 through 8, and 1,080 for grades 9 through 12. So now we'll move on to our breakfast component requirements. For breakfast, we need to offer a grain, fruit, and a milk daily. You'll notice that we do not have a vegetable or a meat alternate component requirement for this meal pattern. You can serve a meat alternate as part of your grain component requirement only after you have already met the 1 ounce equivalent of grains to be served that day. So you have to serve at least 1 ounce equivalent of grains first before you can offer a meat alternate to count towards your grain component. And then vegetables can be used to meet your your fruit requirement as well. So again, we have 3 grade groups here, with an overlap between grades K through 8 and an overlap between grades K through 12. For grades K through 5, you need to offer at least 1 ounce equivalent of grain daily, 1 cup of fruit, and 1 cup of milk daily, making sure that kids are getting 7 ounce equivalents of grain over the course of the week, and 5 cups of both the fruit and the milk component. For grades 6 through 8, these stay the same, the only difference being that they need to get at least 8 ounce equivalents over the course of the week instead of 7. So the daily requirements stay the same. You just need to serve a little bit more of the grain component over the course of the week. And for grades K through 8, it's just going to follow that 6 through 8 component requirement of 1 ounce equivalent daily of the grain component, 1 cup of both the fruit and the milk, 8 ounces equivalent of the grain component for the week, and 5 cups of both the fruit and the milk. For grades 9 through 12, again, we have 1 ounce equivalent of grain to be offered daily, 1 cup of fruit, and 1 cup of milk, 9 ounce equivalents of grain over the course of the week, and 5 cups of both the fruit and the milk component. And then when we get to the grades K through 12, we're just going to stick with that 9 through 12 component requirement, 1 ounce equivalent of grain daily, 1 cup of both fruit and milk daily, 9 ounce equivalents of grain for over the course of the week, and 5 cups of both the fruit and vegetable for the week. Now we'll move into our dietary specifications for breakfast. For our K through 5 meal pattern, we need below 540 milligrams of sodium. Again, our saturated fat needs to be less than 10% of total calories, and our trans fat needs to be 0. 6 through 8, our calorie limits are 400 to 550. Sodium needs to be below 600 milligrams. And our K through 8, we're just going to look at where those calorie ranges overlap, so staying between 400 to 500 calories, and sticking with the K through 5 sodium limitation of 540 milligrams. Grades 9 through 12 need to be served 450 to 600 calories and less than 640 milligrams of sodium. And for the K through 12 overlap, we're just going to look at where those calorie ranges overlap, so between 450 to 500 calories. And then our sodium needs to stick with the K through 5 sodium limitation of 540 milligrams. So that concludes our meal pattern presentation, going over our meal pattern requirements, component contributions, and dietary specifications. If you have questions, please give us a call or visit our website. Thank you.